Hi Wildcats, this is Unit 2, Focus Question 5, but this is Part 2 where we're going to look at the duality of light. Um, Fair warning, this video is a good resource for the notes, but what we're going to do in class I think is much better. There's a number of demos that we can do that I think really demonstrate um, some of the properties that we'll talk about here. I have linked videos to some of these things in the learning resources, so you can go and see that if you'd like to take kind of a deeper dive or if you can't be at this lecture. There's also some great resources on YouTube, people that have much better production quality than I do. But so if you're really interested in this, I find it fascinating, or you want to kind of supplement some of the things that we talk about in this video or in class, I would encourage you to go to check that out. Veritasium does a great job discussing this in a number of different videos. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to call this video the duality of light, but it's worth noting that we're using light to study all electromagnetic radiation. So what we talk about today in this video is we'll refer to light because that was kind of how this discovery was made. But as you can see in this picture, and as we learned in the previous part of this focus question, light is just a small section of the electromagnetic spectrum. So it's worth noting anything we say in this video applies to all electromagnetic radiation. It's just that light is used because it's the easiest part of the electromagnetic spectrum for us to detect. So you'll see these discoveries were made over a long period of scientific history. And if you go back hundreds of years, we didn't know about radio waves or microwaves or gamma rays at that time, and we didn't have instruments that could detect it. So light was what was used to study it. And as a result, it's just what is still referred to these days, the duality of light, but it applies to all electromagnetic radiation. Okay, so let's get started. Really the question here is, what is light? And the very first person to kind of study this was Sir Isaac Newton. And he did a number of studies, but one of the ones that pertains here is he kind of took this idea that if you shine light on a mirror through like a laser, it reflects. And so he called that like a stream of particles. So the same way, like if you took a tennis ball and bounced it off a steel plate, it's going to bounce off, right? And so therefore his conclusion was light must be a particle. He called them corpuscles, but it's irrelevant. Like he first discovered this idea that light is a particle because the way that light behaves, it reflects, right? So, boom, case solved. Isaac Newton was a genius, and so therefore light must be a particle, right? Right. Then another scientist comes along. His name is Christian Huygens. Uh, he said, "Sorry, Sir Newton, uh, you are incorrect. Light is actually a wave, and he can prove it." So he didn't have fancy lasers, but he used candles and made the realization that light can pass through each other. And that's not something particles can do, right? If I shoot two tennis balls at each other, they don't pass through each other. They bounce off of each other. Light, on the other hand, can. So when we shine two lasers through each other, they don't bounce off, they go through each other. And the same can be said with different colors of lights or even just light in general. So therefore, light can't be a particle. Light has to be a wave because only waves can move through each other. Right. Okay, got it. So light, not a particle, is a wave. Check. Thomas Young. Right. So this was much debated. Is light a particle? Is light a wave? Etc. Etc. Thomas Young comes along and does this experiment and says, if we shine a light on a barrier, if light were particles, then it would hit the barrier, and in areas where it's not hitting the particle or the barrier, the particles would just go straight. And so behind this barrier would be completely dark. That's not what we actually see though. What we see is that there's a shadow, right? So if I were standing behind this wall and you shined a light over here, I would see some of that light, right? It would come behind the wall. And so particles would be blocked by a barrier, but waves would kind of spread out once they got past the barrier. And that's exactly what happens. So, boom, Thomas Young, yep, Huygens is right, Newton was wrong. Light is absolutely a wave because shadows don't go in a straight line, right? They spread out. So light must be a wave. Further evidence. Okay, not looking good for Newton. Next scientist, Thomas Young. Sorry, same scientist. Thomas Young like puts the nail in the coffin. He does this double slit experiment. And so this one, I'm just going to briefly touch the surface on it, but he like decides this is going to be the one. Okay, so here's what he does. He shines light through two teeny tiny little slits. And this is going to help us figure it out because if light is a particle, then those particles, right, think of like a whole bunch of tennis balls or BBs. If I shoot a whole bunch of them and there's only two little slits for him to go through, the only ones that will get through are the ones that can go through these slits in a straight line. And so we'd end up with two distinct bands and everything else would be blocked. If light's a wave, when it gets through, it's going to spread out and then it will overlap. So we would end up with areas of constructive interference where the light waves build on each other, and destructive interference where they cancel out. Okay, so this is like the test. There's a really good video. It's on the learning resources. It's a Veritasium video where they actually do this out on the beach. It's great. Go check it out. And so what you get is actually this. Okay, so these are our two options. If light's a particle, it's going to be two lines. If light is a wave, we're going to get a whole bunch of lines due to constructive and destructive interference of the light waves. What you actually get is this. So that's it. Sealed deal, right? We have bright spots, that's constructive interference, and we have dark spots, that's destructive interference. So therefore, light must absolutely 100% be a wave. Got it. Light is a wave. Michael Faraday, possibly my favorite scientist of all time, also dove into this. Working from the idea that light is a wave, he set up these polarizing filters. Okay, so polarizing filters are basically light filters, and then the lines. So this is how like polarized sunglasses work, right? Polarized sunglasses, they have lines. You can't see them. They're super fine. And so you line them straight, and they can be all aligned straight up and down. If I turn the filter 90 degrees, then they're all aligned left and right. And so if light is a wave, then it would block it because if I use two filters, I have one set of lines filters going up and down. So that's going to block everything that's not up and down, and it polarizes the light. And then if I have a second filter that's perpendicular, now it's going to block all of the light because this first filter blocks everything that's left and right. So only up and down gets through. And then the second one blocks everything that's not left and right. There's none there. So no light would get through. If it were particles, then just like before in the double slit experiment, some of these things would come through. There's a demo that we do in class that shows this. If you take two pairs of polarized sunglasses and turn them 90 degrees to each other, you will see that they block all light. And so when we use polarizing filters, it blocks all the light. That was only possible if light is a wave. If it were particles, then it wouldn't matter which way the filters are aligned. And so light must be a wave. Thomas Young showed it, did the definitive experiment. Faraday followed up, did even more. So absolutely, light is a wave. Yep, light is a wave. Lots and lots and lots of research showing that. We have reached our conclusion of this video. Light is a wave. But then it wasn't. Okay, so here's another research was done further down the line. And what was really interesting is they found out that if I shine electromagnetic radiation on a surface, I can actually get electrons to come bouncing off of this surface. So that's not what would happen with waves though, because like waves they don't interact with matter, they go like through matter, right? And yet that's not what we're seeing here. If I shine a wave at it, electrons, it's interacting with it, and like literally electrons are bouncing off. And so called everything we knew into question. Like that should not absolutely be what's happening if light is a wave. And yet we have all this research that shows that light is a wave. So what actually is happening here, this is called the photoelectric effect. And basically, what is happening is sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. So, what they figured out is that if I have a high frequency waves have really high amounts of energy, so like gamma waves, X-rays, that's why they can actually damage your cells. Like X-rays can cause cancer in high doses because they have enough energy to actually like mess with your cells. If I shine waves, electromagnetic waves that are really high in energy, they interact with the atoms in the plate and then electrons come flying off. So that tells us light must be a thing. Excuse me. If it's interacting with matter, if it has enough energy, it's got to be a thing, right? Waves don't do that. And so maybe after all this time telling Newton he was wrong, Newton was actually right. And so you're probably like, well, who did this? Is it actually a reliable source? Yes, two of the greatest minds in science worked with this idea. One, his name was Max Planck. He realized that energy is not continuous, right? Waves are continuous. They just continue on. There's no like stop and start. He realized energy in electromagnetic radiation is not continuous like a wave, but it's quantized. So the amount of energy a wave has some specific value. And then there is like the smallest unit of energy, and it's named after him. It's called the Planck length. Other guy, may have heard of him, Albert Einstein. He realized that since light and all electromagnetic radiation is energy, it must also be quantized, and he came up with this term, quantized light, photon. So photons of light, or he called them photons. You can think of them as particles of light. So the big idea here is that light, or electromagnetic radiation or waves, must be something. Those some things are photons that can interact with matter. So what the heck? We have lots of evidence, right? Polarization, totally a thing. Double slit experiment, totally a thing. Yet the photoelectric effect and this fact that like light and electromagnetic waves can interact with matter and the fact that it reflects all tell us that light is a thing. So what's going on? It, what is going on? Okay. I got a little ahead of myself. This is the photoelectric effect. We see this all the time, right? We started in the start of this unit. I talked about how, right, electrons vibrate back and forth between these orbitals when they take in and give off energy. Well, that has to mean that like this energy is interacting with these atoms, and that's something that waves wouldn't do. They would move through the matter, not interact with it. So that's weird. Photosynthesis, the process that is basis for all life on Earth, requires this. So photons of light interact with the atoms in a chloroplast in plant cells, and actually like that energy is then transferred through the different parts of the leaf, and then that's how um, plants take energy, right? We know plants, you've learned since like little kid school, plants get energy from the sunlight. Well, how do they get that energy? They must be interacting with it. And if it were a wave, it would move through them. So, yeah, like the photoelectric effect is a thing, and it totally means that light must be a thing as well. So, what is light? It depends. So, light is both. Okay, electromagnetic radiation is both. Light is a particle sometimes. When you observe it interacting with matter, we have to think of it as a particle, right? It has to like interact with those plates. It has to interact with the chloroplast. It has to interact with the electrons in a cell to cause them to, or in an atom to cause them to come bouncing out, or change their orbitals. So it has to be a particle, but it also has to be a wave because it can pass through other waves. And so when it moves from one place to another, we think of light as a wave. But when it gets to that place and it interacts with something, we would say that it is a particle. And so this is the duality, dual meaning two. So the duality of light. Electromagnetic radiations are two things at the same time, and it's weird. Um, this is if you use this link again, it's on the learning resources. Just a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, I think, scientists got kind of the first quote unquote photo of light being two things. So this has absolutely definitively been proven. It is weird. It kind of bends our mind in terms of what we know, right? We're not used to things being two things at one time. It's either this or that, but the universe does not interested in like just how we perceive things. This is from a large body of evidence. We can definitively say that light is two things. And so when we say the duality of light, we say that light is both a particle and a wave at the same time. And as we said at the start, that's true of all electromagnetic radiation. So I hope you find this as fascinating as I do. Again, go check out some videos, whether that be the learning resources or just on your own. It's fascinating to me that this is so wild and weird, but that is just how science is sometimes. So I hope this helps as we kind of organize what electromagnetic radiation actually is.